Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Lis Experiment. This is the YouTube channel where I share my life's journey or my journey towards architecting my best life. And this week, I am talking to you again from Oakland, the mountains of Oakland. I'm here still house sitting for a Formosa mountain dog named Faye, and I'm looking over at her right now. If you remember last week's episode, Faye was not too fond of me. She's not too fond of many people, but I feel like we've made giant strides. She's laying in the next room as opposed to the other side of the house. So that's big. We've had some major developments in that regard. She laid next to the fire next to me when I was sitting on the couch. She was laying next to the fire in the same room. So that was big. That was last night. And then this weekend we went for a walk with one of the homeowner's friends and their dog. They call the dog Cousin Kylie, and her and Faye are really great friends. And so I've had a lot of Faye love happening. So things are good things are much better on the dog front. So what else is happening? So what am I thinking about this week along my journey towards architecting my best life? I've had a kind of like, do you ever have any of those weeks where it feels like a lot and then it feels like not a lot all at the same time? I'm having one of those weeks where I've been thinking a lot about old cycles and do-overs. And this was a topic that was brought forth to me by my dear friend. So I've been working with an old boss of mine who's now an independent consultant and has hired me to do independent consulting work with her. And that's a cycle that I've been playing with. The cycle of working and being around a dog who's not necessarily easy. Like some dogs are super easy and some dogs aren't, She's wonderful, she's sweet, but she's not necessarily just going to walk up to you and let her pet you. But don't worry, folks. This week I got a few pets in. So that is a cycle I've been working on. I've been working on the cycle of how I react to stress and pressure. And I say working on, but I shouldn't say that. I've been thinking about them and I haven't been taking the actions that I should, which is, okay, the universe is giving me this old cycle, this do-over. What do I want to do differently? So that's something I hope to look at in the coming week or in the coming weeks, or especially along this journey as I continue throughout it. What I did work on this week was patience, and a whole lot of patience and acceptance. So being patient with myself as a result of being patient with Faye, the dog I've been house sitting for. If she didn't want to come in, I wouldn't force her to come in. This was very hard for me, things like that. If she didn't want to eat, I wouldn't force her to eat. Not like I would force feed a dog, or I'm not trying to get crazy here on YouTube, but I wouldn't force the things I usually would. And that was super, super hard. And you know what? Now that we're talking about this, I'm thinking about, I had some super adverse reactions to just everyday pressures this week, and I bet you some of it was because I was taking different action in that regard, and my psyche and my ego was like combating that. So that's something to consider and think about. So accepting Faye, accepting myself, submission, and what I mean by that is that it goes along with not trying to force it and not trying to push my agendas and not trying to be better just to be better, but to sit and listen to the lessons that are coming at me and when I say that, let me explain that, because one of my goals with this sort of field notes along my journey towards architecting my best life is to explain what to me are very like amorphous concepts. Like, I just sat and listened to what? The radio? Like, who are you listening to? So when I say that, it's like I listen a lot to what other people are saying, even if we're talking about a different topic. And when I stop and just listen, the wisdom will come forth and appear. Like I'll feel a stirring in me, which I'll be like, oh wait, maybe that can apply to a situation that I'm dealing with, even if we're talking about like oranges. I don't know, So that's what I mean by sitting and listening and submitting, instead of considering and thinking about how am I going to respond to this. I'm thinking about nothing. I'm just listening. I'm just trying to be present and listen. Which is the fourth thing I was trying to work on this week, which is present moment awareness. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it on the blog, and so I'll link a little bit. I'll link to that blog post that I'm referring to. But as I was driving across the country, my latest road trip from New Mexico to Oakland, I had a lot of reflections and thinking about self-love. I think I did talk about this last week. And one of the things that came up for me was none of that self-love is possible as long as I stay in my head and in my own mind created reality, so to speak. So, and I think a lot of us, I know a lot of us do this. We create a reality in our heads that we either feel trapped in or elated by or whatever it is, but it's not what's actually happening. And so by being present and being aware, you can be within what's actually happening. And by being within that, you can then start to cultivate self-love, because you can get to know yourself, what you like, what you don't like. And this came through for me in a few ways. And I obviously through my own reflections, as I just mentioned, and then I shared them with the friend, and he had brought up Gestalt therapy. And I'll provide a link to that in the show, in the comment description about area. You know what I'm saying, YouTubers. And I have a friend who actually is a certified Gestalt coach. She's not a therapist, but it's a similar, obviously the same philosophy. And that has a lot to do with bringing one back to the present moment and Eastern philosophies and that sort of thing. So because my notes here say what I worked on. I thought about present moment awareness, and the way that I thought about working on it, and the way that I feel that I started very minutely working on it, was in looking up Gestalt and thinking more about therapy and working with a therapist who can help me in this regard. So in the regard of the present moment awareness, that theme came up for me a little bit in that I've gotten some leads on therapists that I may start trying to work with, but I got to be honest with y'all. I'm on the road a lot, so doing online therapy versus in-person therapy in order to find present moment awareness and self-love and all that stuff, I'm not sure how it's going to work. If you have any thoughts on that, leave some comments below, because I am actively searching for solutions in this regard. I don't want to say solutions. I'm actively searching for threads to pull on in order to become more present and eventually cultivate confidence, less anxiety, self-love, all of the things that make life easier and more rewarding. Some themes that came up this week. Gestalt was one of them. Gestalt just kept coming up. And for me, when a theme comes up, I'm not really quite sure what to do with it. But I have been working on, when these themes come up, looking into them, researching them, just pulling on that thread, looking it up online, bringing it up in conversations, and seeing where things go. And what I find is when I do that, I'm usually led somewhere that either solves an issue I've been having, or enhances my life, or makes me feel more connected. So I encourage all of us to do that as we go throughout life. By being more present, you can see the themes that are being presented and follow them, and then yada yada. The other one, which is totally random, is something called remote year. I'll provide a link to that as well. But I talked to a friend of a friend who did remote year, which is basically, I think they have programs that are either 4 months to 12 months. And every month you go to a new country or city, and they basically provide accommodation and co-working space. And you just you go and you experience it. So I talked to this woman, this friend of a friend, about remote year. And then as I was talking to my friend who's the Gestalt coach, just in general, she was like, have you ever heard of remote year? I'm like, that's weird, because I was talking to a woman just 2 days ago about it, and it was interesting. So I brought that theme up to a friend, and I said, yeah, the remote year keeps popping up for me. And she was like, well, do they have any jobs available? I'm like, I don't know. So then I started looking around on their site and thinking more about that. I think what that theme is going to lead me to is spending a month at a time in one place in order to kind of root in and not travel so much in a crazy way. But we'll see as the journey unfolds what happens there. And the last part of this, of what this isn't so much no, it's not so much a theme, but to kind of round out this week's field notes, the other big idea that's being presented, and I mentioned it in a way with self-love, is an authentic self and expressing your true self. And this came through for me both with looking up Gestalt's principles, speaking with my friend about his own journey, and there's a podcast that I listen to called, I don't know what it's called, but it's about Bruce Lee. I don't know if it's just Bruce Lee, but it's his daughter and the Bruce Lee Foundation that she runs. And they talk about and basically explain his philosophy. And the episode I was listening to this week was Expressing Your True Self. And she describes how Bruce Lee was adamant about that, about finding out who he was through a lot of self-exploration, asking himself what he liked, what he didn't like, who he was, what made him who he was. And it was a practice that he did over time. It wasn't like he did self-exploration and then he was cured and then he was Bruce Lee, the badass movie star. It was like this ongoing practice of exploration, but then also taking action and being his true self. When he made Return of the Dragon, for example, he was adamant that they include his script changes and wouldn't go to set for like 2 weeks until they did. So that idea and that concept is something that came up for me this week, and it's one that I hope to continue to reflect on and work on as I go throughout the rest of the journey. So that's this week of the Lis Experiment. I hope that, I don't know, I hope that this was at least entertaining, and I hope you can take away something from the ramblings that I'm sharing in my field notes. At the very least, yeah, I hope it was entertaining. If you have any thoughts or comments or things to add, if like anything came up for you as you were watching this and you're like, oh, you know what? I bet blah, blah, blah. Please add it in the comments below. I want this to be as interactive as possible because I don't want to be alone on the journey. Oh, look who it is. The dog just walked by. Oh, she's stretching. See, folks, we're already friends. We're practically best friends. So I'm going to go let her out, but hopefully you had a great week, and I look forward to sharing my journey towards architecting my best life with you next week.